Hello, friends. You are welcome to Anchor Network, where you get updates of things happening around you. I appreciate every one of you that have subscribed to this channel. And if you have not subscribed, I say thank you very much, because I know that at the end of this news, you are going to subscribe. And I want you to press the red button and also the bell icon so that you'll be notified anytime we publish any news. Thank you very much once again.
Arms scandal. Jonathan Dasuki denied granting Amosun approval for Amore. Former President Goodluck Jonathan on Thursday said he did not grant any approval for the construction of an armory for former Ogun State Governor Ibikunle Amosun or any governor during his presidential term between 2010 and 2015. I am not aware of any approval to build an armory to stockpile weapons, Mr. Jonathan told Premium Times Thursday afternoon through a close associate, who was a minister in his administration. He advised his newspaper to further confirm from former National Security Advisor Sambo Dasuki that no such approval was granted. Mr. Dasuki has in the past 4 years been in the custody of the State Security Service (SSS), and this newspaper was unable to directly contact him. But a former director at the Office of the National Security Advisor who worked closely with Mr. Dasuki during Mr. Jonathan's era said no such approval was given during Mr. Dasuki's tenure. NSA Dasuki did not grant anyone approval to build an armory, the former official said. He asked not to be named so as not to be victimized by the current administration. Maintaining an armory in Government House is an illegal activity, and we did not approve any such request during our time. We did not permit any governor to store arms and ammunition. If he insists there was an approval granted for his armory, we challenge him to make the documentation public. Mr. Jonathan was Nigeria's president at a time of heightened insecurity during which the Boko Haram set became a full-blown danger to Nigeria's corporate existence. The Jonathan administration was preoccupied with containing Boko Haram and other manifestations of insecurity under his tenure, and Mr. Amosun, as an opposition politician, would have raised a red flag if he sought to purchase weapons and stockpile them at his official residence. While struggling to extricate himself from Premium Times' story about how he stockpiled sophisticated arms and ammunition at Ogun State Government House, Abeokuta, in a blatant violation of Nigeria's Firearms Act, Mr. Amosun had claimed that he received permission from Mr. Jonathan to import weapons and stockpile them for security purposes. Premium Times had reported on Monday night that Mr. Amosun stored arms and ammunition for a long period at his official residence when he was governor. The politician, now a senator, called the police commissioner, Basha Makama, and hurriedly handed over the weapons to him a day before he left office on May 28. National security officials found Mr. Amosun's action particularly troubling and illegal, expressing further dismay that the country's security architecture failed to detect such a massive cake of arms and ammunition for such a long time. In his defense, Tuesday night, Mr. Amosun denied keeping the AK-47 in his residence, but admitted he had the ammunition and armored personnel carrier in his possession until his last day in office and 7 years after he supposedly procured them for the police. He said he stored the weapons in a designated armory at the government house. Still, the Firearms Act and other extant firearms regulations absolutely prohibit possession of the type of bullet and armored personnel carrier, all categorized as controlled equipment, that Mr. Amosun admitted handing over to Mr. Makama on his last day in office. The law grants the president exclusive power to authorize establishment of armories, and now Mr. Jonathan, who was the president at the time, had said there was no such approval for Mr. Amosun or any state governor throughout his tenure. Outraged Nigerians immediately called on security agencies to swoop on Mr. Amosun and ensure he was thoroughly prosecuted, but security chiefs have been reluctant to take action. On Wednesday, Premium Times raised 10 questions for Mr. Amosun that bordered largely on the illegality of his arms stockpile, but the former governor has not responded. Rotimi Durojaye, a spokesperson for Mr. Amosun, did not immediately return Premium Times emails seeking comments about Mr. Jonathan's position on Thursday. On Thursday evening, Mr. Amosun himself repeatedly disconnected telephone calls from Premium Times. On Thursday afternoon, Chidi Odikalu, an expert on security matter, also raised further observations about how Mr. Amosun might have endangered the lives of those who visited the government house during his tenure. There are basic rules for storage of firearms on this case. Mr. Odikalu said, "Do you know how many people visited the Ogun State government house in the past 7.5 years? How many of them knew they were sitting on armory, and how many would have gone if they knew they were visiting an armory?" There's a reason why firearms on this scale have to be stored under strict rules in armories away from civilian populations, because they are very delicate and could go off spontaneously with serious injuries to human life. You recall the Ikeja cantonment explosions 18 years ago. Even if everything Mr. Amosu says is true, who permitted him to convert the government house into an armory? He also seems to suggest that he had a monopoly of capacity to oversee and monitor the distribution of and access of these firearms. What was he, a feudal lord? For the fact that he eventually handed over this stuff to the police the day before he left office showed that he did not, in fact, need to do what he did, which then raises the question why he did do it. This leads us to the third point. Mr. Amosun is not the last governor of Ogun. If he could monopolize custody of firearms in the government house, then surely that prerogative should also be open to his successor. But he acted to ensure his successor did not discover the firearms or have access to them the same way that he did. The reason is obvious. If his successor had gone into the government house and found that it was an armory, there would have been a massive stink like you have not known before. So by this process of induction, it is easy to see that the reason of Mr. Amosun were far from sanguine in altruistic. Surely he has serious questions to answer. It is really that simple. Wow. Amosu said Jonathan granted him approval. Jonathan has come out and say he doesn't know what he's talking about. That if really is insisting that he himself, as the president then, granted him that permission, that he should make the processing, the documentation public. And according to what Premium Times is saying, that they've been trying to reach him since Jonathan has said he doesn't know anything about what Amosun is talking about. They've not been able to reach him. Even Dasuki too said they don't know what Amosun is talking about. So who is saying the truth and who is not saying the truth? That's the big questions for us. And a lot of people have been, saying their own opinion from different quarters. Some people say the problem in this country is lack of discipline, and in the political arms, it is obvious that he has been working with some people, or maybe has been having some kind of a privileges that people do not really know. All these politicians, you can't really trust them enough, because once they just get there, they feel that they have the power to do and undo. And some people are really calling him, all manner of names, which they cannot really substantiate, because until when court has really pronounced him guilty before anything can be said. So we are still waiting for his reply based on what Goodluck Jonathan has said. So guys, I would like you to leave your opinion below. Thank you very much.